This started for two reasons. One, Russia started clamping down on information being shared. They're becoming more like North Korea, so they banned Telegram. Telegram is the main source of communication on the front lines for soldiers in Russia. The second thing that happened is that Elon Musk had a tiny flash of morality for the first time. Maybe it was a slip, maybe it wasn't. And he decided to stop supplying telecommunication systems to an invading army in Europe. And that's because A, 70% of Americans actually support Ukraine, but B, he was put under more pressure more recently online, on Twitter. So all communications are down. And now Russians are resorting to World War I style communication systems, which basically relies on digging holes in the ground, putting wires into the floor and shouting into those wires. And this is terrible for the Russians. You know, they must be devastated because what they would be doing now would be screaming, you know, blet, blet, bomb a children's hospital, raise a town to the ground. And that would happen. And now they're shouting into the void and they're not getting anywhere with it. And they must be devastated. You know, they would be very easily able to call in an airstrike on a school or on a hospital or on a village. And now they can't. So they're really struggling right now. And communications is the beginning of the collapse of a lot of different systems. And on the Ukrainian side, the Starlinks are basically whitelisted. What happened was all the satellites went dark, every single Starlink went dark, and then specific Ukrainian systems that had been told to Musk that were Ukrainians were whitelisted and allowed to go back on again. So Ukrainians can see everything. They've got eyes on the sky, and that gives them a massive advantage. The fog has cleared, the weather's warmed up, and so they can storm areas they know there are no Russians, and they can call in airstrikes in places they know there are command centers. So it's really had a huge impact. Again, like communications are like everything in war. So this is the beginning, I think, of a big Ukrainian advance. A few villages now, I think it's 70 villages, something like this, is a good start. But if this continues, it's really gonna be amazing for Ukraine. I didn't see this coming at all. Last time I was in Donbass, you know, the Russians were moving in the wrong direction. They were moving in this direction. I didn't expect this.
Then I have a follow-up question. If Russia will have to step back from their own territories, how are they gonna react, you know? I mean, not only on propaganda right now, but what actions they could take.
I don't think that Russia is going to do a massive reaction because they are distracted with Iran. Putin right now is on the phone 24/7 watching and monitoring what is happening with Iran, one of their closest allies, and they are completely distracted. And Russia really is in a difficult situation right now. And I don't think they have the ability and time to counteract this right now. I mean, if Iran falls, it's going to be even worse. But if it doesn't, it's going to be in a difficult situation. So I don't see any reaction, to be honest, right now. I think as long as there's massive destabilization in the Middle East, I think Russia's going to be pretty quiet. We're going to see a pretty quiet few days.
Russia has lost a lot of aircraft in war against Ukraine, but they cannot replace it. Why?
Corruption doesn't build fighter jets. And the supply lines that existed that built the type of planes that Russia is using to bomb this country disappeared a long time ago. Russia relies still on very old technology. The parts don't really exist anymore. And with sanctions, with corruption, with a massive labor shortage of people who would have been making these things but are now dead in the trenches and fields of Ukraine, means that it's impossible to really reopen these supply lines quickly. And Euromaidan Press reported that the A50 supply line tried to be reopened. Russia demanded that it was reopened. And Ukraine bombed it 4 times, which is pretty good. And that caused $350 million worth of damage. And it basically rendered it incapable of reopening. So, I mean, whenever Russia tries to reopen something, if they can get past the production layers, the labor shortage layers, the supply chain layers, then it would be bombed anyway. So really, they're not going to build new stuff. But the key is the mentality. Russia, when it decided to invade Ukraine in the 2022 full-scale invasion, thought that it had enough supplies in its stockpile to continue this war for at least a couple of years, maybe 3 or 4 years. But that stuff is really being depleted on a massive scale. And it's very hard to rebuild it in a broken country, an economically broken country. So I don't see them opening these things up anytime soon. They really want the parts. Iran aren't going to supply the parts much because it's busy.
Yeah, well, that was my next question, the situation in the Middle East. Why do you think the United States that was going to isolationism now is effectively attacking Iran together with Israel? Why American president, who so desperately wanted a peace prize, so actively satisfying, enjoying with the bombing other cities?
Because Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff is in charge of peace negotiations with Iran and with Russia and Ukraine. And I just got back here to Ukraine and I watched missiles fall on Kyiv at 3 o'clock in the morning. And I turned on the news this morning and saw the Middle East on fire. And these two are put in place because they are business orientated. They are wheelers and dealers. They're basically there because Trump loves money and he grew up with people that love money. They're put in place because they're corrupt. And this is what happens when you put idiots in charge of peace negotiations. You get eruptions and fire in the Middle East. And we're going to see far more of this as long as Trump puts idiots in his cabinet. And that is literally the reason this is happening. That is why the United States is getting involved. And also that's why, Steve Witkoff, who has insisted on peace the entire time, if you look at a graph or a chart of the number of drone attacks that have landed in Kyiv since Trump took office, it's gone up tenfold since Biden took office. Peace has gotten less. Actually, things have gotten worse since these two have been put in power. And again, that's what happens when you put these people in charge. I chased Steve Witkoff down the street because I seem to be the only journalist that wanted to ask these questions about his business deals with one side. But again, you put people in charge whose job it is to make money, not have peace, you're going to get war.
You're going to get a war. How Ukraine may benefit from this?
Ukraine is going to massively benefit from what's happening. Well, there are two groups of people that are massively going to benefit from the fall of Iran. And that is the Iranian people first, who are desperate for freedom, who right now are still dancing in the streets with missiles falling behind them because they've been oppressed for so long. And the second group are Ukrainians who have watched Shahed drones. They're called Shahed because they were designed in Iran. They're still made in Russia now, but designed in Iran. And watched Iran arm and provide weapons and intel to Russia for this entire war. There's just as much of an enemy as Russia. And actually, Russia is in a terrible situation right now because they have to make two decisions. The first decision is to arm Iran and support their friend that's under attack right now. That would require sending them missiles, S-300 systems, ammo.
Do you think they're going to do that?
I don't think they're going to do that. But if they did do that, then they would be depleted more in their weapons, and that's less weapons that would be sent into this country. The second option is to just let them alone, leave them alone, and not help them at all. But that would be terrible for Russia because every other one of their friends, North Korea, all the other countries in the BRICS that thought that they would be supported by Russia, would watch and say, oh, so if we're under attack and something bad happens to us, Russia's just going to disappear. They're not going to help us. So Russia's in a terrible situation, regardless of what happens, any of those two situations. And that is fantastic for Ukraine. Any bad news for Russia is good for Ukraine. So it's going to incredibly benefit this country. And again, the Iranian people deserve their freedom. I was in Syria just after the fall of Assad, and I watched on New Year's Eve as thousands and thousands of young Syrians celebrated with fireworks in the streets after decades of dictatorship in the Assad family. And Iranians would have the same thing. And I asked some of those Syrians as well what they thought about Ukraine. And they said, well, Ukraine deserves exactly the same moment from freedom from Russia as its neighbor. And this, again, would be disastrous. This is a disastrous situation for Russia, a totally disastrous situation. And I don't care who's launching the missiles. We can talk about why Trump did this, why Israel did this. That is completely irrelevant. I want to talk about the outcomes. And the outcomes are, it's great for those two groups of people. It's great for Ukrainians and Iranians. And that is really, really important.